everybody. I'm Karen Hartglass, and you're listening to It's All About Food. It's all about food. That's what we talk about because it's all about food. And so much so on today's episode when I introduce Hanna Garth, the author of the new book, Food Justice Undone. So many dots connected here to food because it's all about food. Did I say that already? Hanna Garth is assistant professor of anthropology at Princeton University, author of Food in Cuba, The Pursuit of a Decent Meal, and co-editor of Black Food Matters, Racial Justice in the Wake of Food Justice. Hello, Hanna, and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Humans are storytellers, and you study anthropology. Maybe there's some redundancy here, which is the study of our origin, where we come from, our behavior, our culture. And what's interesting about anthropology, and it comes through in your book, is the point of view of the storyteller. Who's telling the story?
Hmm.
You get a very different version by the different authors who perceive a situation, an event, a history from their own framework.
Yeah. That's an important turn in anthropology. It wasn't always the case that the author or the researcher needed to describe who they were and where they were coming from. But around the 1980s, anthropologists started to realize that hey, we're actually seeing things through particular kinds of lenses, and we come with a set of biases, but also people are responding to us in these different environments based on their ideas about who we are and where we come from. So it has become increasingly important to like acknowledge who the ethnographer is, what they're bringing to the table, what they might look like, or how they're taken into the community or not accepted by the community. So that's an important part of what anthropologists do now.
I think for me, I came to understanding this concept when I read Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States. That was the light bulb for me. And since then, there's been a lot more light for me. And especially for women,
Yeah.
we have a lot more women telling our story, and women perceive things very often differently than men do.
Yeah.
And so our understanding of cooperation or the the survival of the fittest has changed a bit from a woman's perspective. Okay. So there are so many different groups that we can talk about and how their perspectives will be different of a situation. Is there a right? Is there a wrong? All I know is I would like everyone to be fed and fed well, right?
Yeah. We're on the same page there. I agree.
Good. Um, so I made a lot of notes in the book, and maybe we'll touch on some of them, but let's get with some vocabulary or understanding of some concepts because I think they're important. And the book is called Food Justice Undone. What is food justice?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that the book kind of unravels is that the way that food justice is understood varies across different groups of people. And even within the same group of people, different individuals can have a different sort of conceptualization of justice. The definition that most of the people that I worked with agree upon is the idea that the burdens and benefits of our food system should fall equally upon all of the people in our society. So it's an idea that the good things about our food system, like the fact that we have access to wonderful fresh produce from all over the world and or very locally, and the burdens of our food system, like the fact that we have to deal with issues of food waste, or we have all kinds of low wage work happening in order to keep our food prices low. The idea that those things need to be kind of balanced out, and it shouldn't just be that one set of people has access to the good things and one set of people is suffering through all of the bad things.
And one thing that's been clear to me for a long time is that we have enough food on this planet at this time to feed everyone who is on it well. And that's not a narrative that we hear from everyone, from the food science world, especially genetic modified engineering projects. They have worked with their own internal scientists to believe that we don't have enough food, or we don't grow it well enough, or the food that nature has given us is not sufficient. Yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then they want to force some foods down our throat. I'm thinking of golden rice as an example, which is a food that has, over the decades, yet to get a foothold because it's the stupidest thing, or one of the stupidest things we've ever created. There are plenty of foods locally within us, a community that is struggling to nourish their own people, and they don't need some new thing that they're not used to feed them. They need different kinds of help. And maybe we'll get into that when we talk about South Central in Los Angeles, which is the focus of your book. Any other words I noted here? Equity versus equality.
Mhm.
Justice as equality.
Mhm.
Justice as equity.
Yeah, yeah. Two very different ways of conceptualizing how to kind of do good work in the food system that people often don't even notice the difference in the definitions, but equality means equal things. Like we have the same things. Equity means someone who might be in a more privileged position might not have the same things as someone in a less privileged position because you're put on the same playing field, making things equitable. Um, so this is like a really important way of conceptualizing how we redistribute things in our society and whether or not certain people are given more help or more access than other people. It's it's a fundamental debate across multiple sectors. It's not just about food, but a lot of people think that everything should be about equality. So we're all equal, we all get the same things. But in a system where you have people who've been systematically disenfranchised and have had long-term, deep-seated historical struggles, whether those are race-based, gender-based, other kinds of demographic basis, equitable systems are about kind of bringing those people onto an even playing field with others who've not suffered through those injustices.
It's really an important difference. And when we speak with the right words, or the words that are better at explaining a situation, people either understand the situation better, or if they don't understand the word, I recommend looking it up, and so that you do understand, because words are powerful.
Yeah.
And you brought up something I'm thinking, had I heard it before? I don't know, but I'm going to try and use it more often. And that is when we talk about food deserts versus food apartheid. And I'm liking it to, when I talk about pesticides and herbicides, I prefer to call them biocides. It packs a bigger punch. It incorporates more of reality. It's not washing over some of the issues related to what I'm talking about. And the same thing is with food deserts, which a desert already defines something bleak, but apartheid explains it even more. Can you dig into that a little further?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first term that became really popularly used for understanding food access inequality is the concept of the food desert. And it was created essentially as this imaginary of a place where there's nothing. There's a barren nothingness. There's, just dust, as you might imagine, or sand, as you might imagine a desert to be. And so there's that landscape metaphor got taken up, and a lot of people have critiqued the the sort of lack of awareness about what exists in a desert in the first place, which is that there is a lot of life in a desert and it's not nothing. But the real problem with the metaphor of the desert is that it turns it into kind of a naturalized situation, an environmental situation that just is. And it overlooks the historical and structural context in which we have these different kinds of food systems in different areas. So um, I believe it's Karen Washington and Leah Penniman, who are both food justice activists based in the state of New York, who really come up with the term food apartheid as a way to more accurately describe the what they see as intentional and also systematic forms of racialized and economic discrimination that create what is essentially a separate and unequal food system. So we see this in South Central Los Angeles, where there's actually an entirely different set of grocery stores that operate in South Central versus the beach communities or what they call the West Side in LA, which essentially means like wealthier communities. Um, and so residents actually see like, hey, we have an entirely different set of stores. We have an entirely different food retail landscape here that is a very different thing from what people are experiencing in these more wealthy areas. And that difference they see as a kind of racialized discrimination that creates differentialized access to different kinds of food.
I'm thinking about my own community. I live in New York City in Queens, and Queens has many neighborhoods with many different grocery stores. When I visit my dentist who lives in Jackson Heights, I mean, that's such a lively area of so many ethnicities and there's supposed to be hundreds of languages spoken here, and probably most of them are spoken in Jackson Heights because there's just so many going on there. And I've gone into some of those supermarkets and I don't know, I don't want to define any as better or worse.
Yeah.
They're just different. They offer different foods, especially produce. Well, maybe not especially produce, but some of the produce is more of it maybe for the Hispanic community, foods that they're used to. And then there are different groups. They have their local grocery stores as well, and that's fun. But I want to just mention Whole Foods for a minute.
Mhm.
I used to like Whole Foods. I don't shop there anymore. I don't shop there because it's related to Amazon. It's related to billionaires taking advantage of everyone else and profiting in this obscene way. I don't shop there because one of the things that was disappointing, I mean, it's just capitalism, okay? We live in a capitalistic world and it's all about profit. There used to be lots of health food stores, little ones, and then there were bigger chains, Bread and Circus, and a number of different ones, and they all got gobbled up by Whole Foods. And now Whole Foods isn't so good because it doesn't offer all of the same things that we used to love. And I shop at a local organic health market most of the time. And yeah, we have a Trader Joe's in our neighborhood, and I go there too. But we do have a lot of other little mom and pop shops, so that's a lovely thing about Queens. But the point you make about grocery stores and access to food based on community is a central theme in your book.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So there's a couple of layers that are going on in thinking about the grocery landscape in the book. One is that it is true that there are fewer full service grocery stores per capita in South Central than there are in other communities. Um, and early on in the food justice movement, there was a call for, having an equal amount of grocery stores in South Central or having the same kinds of markets, like having a Whole Foods or having a Trader Joe's. Um, Gelson's is another local higher end market over there. And so many people from the community saw markets like Whole Foods as a representation of the kind of the epitome of a healthy, clean, sleek, new modern supermarket. And so people would say things like, why don't we have a Whole Foods? How come all the Whole Foods are on the West Side? But then when you ask them, like, well, would you actually shop at Whole Foods? They're like, oh, no, 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 it's way too expensive. Like, I'm not going to pay that much money for that stuff. It was the principle of the fact that they had to drive to other communities to be able to access these stores. And this kind of narrative or understanding of who shops at which kinds of stores is also reinforced by the grocery industry. So the grocery industry seeks locations for new markets based on their conceptualization of who's going to shop at their stores and who has the income level to really spend money at their stores. And another important point that I make in the book is that like the grocery industry is motivated by profit. I know that sounds like a really basic and simple fact, but that is the fundamentally the system that we have in the United States. It's not a benevolent or beneficent system where our grocery stores are supposed to give everyone access to food. They are fundamentally about profit and they are about, they actually have a fiduciary responsibility to make money for their shareholders. So they're following the laws and the systems that they are set up within, and they're not necessarily designed to just plop down into places where people don't have enough access to food in order to create that kind of access.
You mentioned that at the towards the end of the book that that some believe food should not be a commodity sold for profit, and I'm right there. I think food, healthcare, it should all be free and accessible. Why
Yep.
not? But we do live in a capitalistic society, and that doesn't bode well for us. And I was thinking when I read that towards the end of the book that because we're in a capitalistic society, the many foods that are offered are not necessarily healthy. They're foods that can create profit. And the laws that we have subsidize foods that are unhealthy for us, and they make unhealthy foods cheaper. And for people that are on a limited income, maybe they're going to go for the unhealthier foods because they cost less. And it's all built into this crazy capitalistic system of making profit. Okay, so where do we go with this? We have all of these wonderful people working or volunteering in the food justice movement. And you dig into that specifically with regard to South Central Los Angeles. And you use different names for the people that you talk about, which was considerate. I wonder if any of those people actually read your book and were happy with what you said about them or not. That might be another story, but I did wonder, oh, I wonder if this person read that. It's always interesting to read what other people feel about your work.
Mhm.
But again, a lot of that comes from where these people came from. And you do mention that a lot of them are white food justice workers coming from outside of the area and how that may or may not help the situation. Go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when I started studying the food justice movement, I started just as a volunteer. I wasn't thinking that it was going to become a research project. I just wanted to be in community gardens and sort of have access to outdoor space that I didn't have living in an apartment. And I didn't really think it could be a research project until I started reflecting on who the people around me were. And I was always surprised that I would go into South Central from the West Side. I lived on the West Side at that point. And everyone that would be volunteering around me was not from South Central. They were coming also from the West Side for the most part. And so I just continued to be kind of fascinated and puzzled by that. And I was looking for something in particular that it took me a really long time to find. I was looking for what I, in my mind, imagined to be the quote unquote real food justice movement or the grassroots movement that was actually members of the community that were coming together and building community gardens or creating different kinds of workshops or programs. I didn't find those things at first.
Hmm.
Instead, what I found was all of these well-meaning, mostly youngish, mostly white people coming from other parts of LA who were really motivated to bring justice to South Central Los Angeles, to help the people of South Central have access to healthy food. So in their minds, they were part of a group of people that was working to create more just food systems and to help create equal access to healthy food in South Central. Um, but what I found was that they brought with them a lot of assumptions and a lot of misinformation about South Central itself and about the people who live in South Central. So then I became really fascinated with these imaginaries that many food justice people had and how they were applying those things. So it could be anything from the idea that there's nothing in South Central.
Hmm.
Um, I heard that over and over and over again. There's nothing
Wow.
there. There's nothing there. There's hundreds of thousands of people who live there, and they live in homes and they have businesses, and there's
And they're
all
eating.
kinds, and they're eating, right? There's all kinds of things going on in South Central, which people must have known because they were going in and out of South Central to do these projects, but they would still uh, create this narrative and reinforce this narrative that there was nothing there. And they would also often have a narrative that the people of South Central didn't know how to eat healthy food, or they just needed to be educated about how to incorporate fruits and vegetables into their diets. And I, again, was fascinated by this because I had friends and I have extended family that live in South Central, and they come from generations of people with ancestral knowledge about cooking and growing food, and they make all kinds of foods in their homes. And so the idea that this whole population of people needed to be taught how to eat healthy food was something that I saw again and again and again with these like outsider food justice activists. And it was very perplexing to me. And so the combination of these two things, the idea that there is nothing there and that people don't know anything, ended up being the kind of foundation upon which many people created their food justice interventions. And those false assumptions led to creating interventions that were not very effective, went from being just like mildly ineffective to actually offensive and like putting people off.
I just want to give some statistics. You give in the early part of your book, Important Facts About South LA as of 2020. Now, most of your research took place before then, about a decade or so before. But you note that 56% are Latinx, 38% are Black. Many residents make 20,000 or less and have less than a high school education. 63% rented their homes. I mean, these are important statistics. They're a little different than other parts of the United States, and important when we talk about food justice, I suppose. Um, and it's nice that people care and want to help. And you mentioned numerous times, and this I have personal experience with, when it comes to being involved with a nonprofit organization, what you can and cannot do, and the funding that's available. Funding makes what you want to do very restrictive
Mhm.
because many of the grants that are available want you to fit a certain narrative. They want short-term solutions. They don't say we want short-term solutions, but they want results within a certain time period that are actionable, that are countable.
Mhm.
And this is very frustrating because uh, I know from my personal experience and my objective is not in alignment with a lot of organizations that are trying to improve America's health, access to healthy food. And I just gave up. I'm like, I'm not going to do that work because I don't fit into their narrative. And you mentioned this time and time again, where some people um, try and fit their narrative into what the grants offered will allow, and those who don't.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's a very difficult and constraining landscape. The nonprofit funding, and even some funding that's not necessarily tied to being a 501(c)(3), but is just has a lot of parameters and strings attached to it, essentially creates these very short timelines upon which groups of people need to have a tangible outcome. And so people, well-meaning people might begin the conversation saying like, let's go in and let's talk to the community and let's see like what does the community want? Do they want a grocery store? Do they want like a bus that takes them to Whole Foods? Like what do they want? And then as people are sitting around the table having a conversation, they're like, they realize like we don't have time. We don't have time to talk to people. We don't have time to figure out what they want. We
Mm-hmm.
need to, like, if we work backwards, we have to have results in 1 year. And in order to have results in 1 year, we have to implement this thing in 6 months. And in order to implement this thing in 6 months, we've got to get started on it tomorrow. And that consistently happens again and again. And it also causes people to kind of whittle down their goal, right? So
Mm-hmm.
rather than aiming for the goal of really improving the situation in South Central, they might work their way down to a very tangible goal like we will place some fresh fruits and vegetables in a liquor store. And then that becomes a goal that they can reach in a 1 year timeline, and they can say that they've successfully completed the outcomes of the grant that they sought to complete. And so this to me is like a major issue that comes from the nonprofit structure and the timelines of funders.
And you give specific examples, and I remember reading about the corner grocery store everyone was excited about, and there was a lot of wonderful ideas that went into creating its renovation to provide healthier food access. And then you come back years later, womp, womp, womp. Kind of went back to offering the same kinds of junk food because of distribution.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about distribution has always been the problem all over the world in terms of feeding people, whether it's people who just don't have the power in different communities because they're poor, the food just doesn't get to them. They may be farming chocolate and tobacco, but they don't have access to food to feed their families. And it was true in this one store as well.
Yeah, yeah. So distribution works for large corporations. It's made for large corporations. Um, we now have a structure where wholesalers are the kind of middlemen between producers and the store. And wholesalers deliver to large grocery stores. They make orders based on sophisticated systems that tell them exactly what they're going through in the store and how many people are buying things and what they need to order. We learned about the hiccups of this system during the pandemic when our
Mm.
just-in-time supply system fell apart. But that system absolutely is not made for and does not work for small business owners. So in order to incorporate fresh fruits and vegetables into some of these small corner stores or liquor stores in South Central, they have to go to the central warehouse district wholesale district in Los Angeles and buy quantities that are available. There are some fruits and vegetables that are only available in an entire pallet, which I think includes 16 boxes of vegetables or fruit. And there's some where you can buy just a box, but a box of bananas is a massive quantity of bananas. I don't actually know how many are in a box, but bananas have such a short shelf life for most Americans. Like we don't want them when they're green. We don't want them when they're brown. We want them perfectly ripe in this very, very narrow
When
window.
they are flecked with brown and have a golden view, bananas taste the very, very best to you. Sorry, I learned that when I was really young.
That's great. Um, so the corner store owner might be able to go to the wholesale district and buy a box of bananas, but they're not going to sell all of those. So they're going to lose money. And as I talked to more and more corner store owners who were trying to sell healthy fresh fruits and vegetables, they felt that it just wasn't worth their time to be driving into the wholesale market and then driving back to their store in order to only sell a few items. And different nonprofits tried to create systems that helped with this redistribution. So one nonprofit that I call Barrio Bite in the book tried to create an order system for small corner stores, and they would go to the wholesaler and buy things and then repackage them so
Hmm.
that you could have a combination of bananas, oranges, apples, cucumbers, whatever for your store. But it ended up being logistically impossible for the tiny, tiny staff that was working on this. And they stopped doing the program. And so far, I haven't seen other attempts to rectify this distribution problem at the scale of small corner stores in South Central.
Yeah, that is a big challenge. How do we fix that one? Uh, the other thing we touched on is short-term solutions, and you mentioned numerous people, their real names in your book. And one of them was Julie Gutham. I love her books. She's been on this program. The last thing we talked about was her book, The Problems with Solutions. And a
Yeah.
lot of what you talk about in this book sounds like that, the problem with solutions. And
Yeah.
many of them are short term, many of them do not really address what's needed and don't ask the people what they want. And that's not just a South Central Los Angeles problem. In my own apartment building, we did a renovation here for the decoration, the carpets and the painting and our lobby redesign. And the designer was clueless. And she did not talk to the people that worked here, like our door attendants who knew about packaging and how to handle it. And the result was a disaster. And years later, we ended up doing what one of our doormen had recommended. So it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I absolutely love Julie Guthman's work. Like her earlier work actually really helped open my eyes to the whiteness of the alternative food system. She's got some really great pieces on that from the early to mid 2000s. And The Problem with Solutions is an excellent book, and I wish I could have engaged it more in Food Justice Undone, but it came out just as I was like finishing
Oh,
the
yeah. Hmm.
final edits. So I think I snuck in a citation, but I didn't really have time to sort of fully digest and bring in what Guthman does with The Problem with Solutions, which is very much in line with all of the things that I saw. So the issue that Guthman sees that I also see is that we have we've created this pressure in our society among young people, whether they're like high school level or college level, or I'm even starting to see it in my middle schooler, to create solutions to problems, to be the person that makes a new organization or creates a new app. Um, the way that we train young people to engage with the world is this idea of kind of being a super techno savvy
Oh,
individual that creates an individual based solution to major problems. And we reward people who do that kind of thing. We give
yeah,
them
we do.
scholarships, we
And
give
big
them
money.
money. Yeah, we praise them. So there's a whole system where we, myself included, college professors, are encouraging people to go out there and solve these problems and be the solution. But what Guthman points out and what I saw across many of the people that I worked with is that you can't come up with good solutions if you don't understand the problem. And understanding the problem takes a lot of time and energy. And I think it needs to involve basically what I do as a scholar, which is ethnographic research, talking to people, experiencing their lives, doing what we call participant observation. So if you're going to create a solution for a building, yes, you need to spend time with the doorman. You need to spend like, you know, shadow the doorman on all of his shifts to understand what's going on there. But the problem is that we we don't teach young people how to do this, or older people for that matter. And we don't value the amount of time that it takes to really understand the problem. So we will tell people like, oh, you don't have time, you can't fix like the problems of capitalism. That's too big of a problem. You don't have time to understand this. You need to just focus on like creating the app, creating the website, using the AI driven tool to solve the problem. But these kinds of solutions create whole other sets of problems and continue to ignore the most fundamental problems at the base.
You also talked about how many organizations, when looking to hire, will look to hire people, preferring people with graduate degrees or postgraduate degrees. And I'm all in for education. It's very important. You have advanced degrees. I have a master's degree. It's good stuff, and I learned a lot from it. But there are also many qualified people who are on the ground and know their communities and should be given more opportunities from the experience that they have within their communities, degreed or not. I appreciated you bringing that up. Okay.
Yeah,
Um, a few more vocabulary words. Placemaking. What is that? And why is it important?
yeah. So placemaking, it's both a theoretical construct that people use in academia, but it's also an actual thing that people and activists and other kinds of people engage in on the ground. And so the idea is that people are essentially building community. They are taking a sort of sense of ownership, a sense of community, um, and making a place their own. So that can happen naturally. A set of people can say like, you know, this happens in my neighborhood. There's a couple of people who've taken it upon themselves to clean the storm drain, right? Like they see that there's stuff gathering up in the storm drain and they're going to clean it up themselves. And that's them saying, like, I'm a member of this community and I want my storm drain to be clean and I'm going to do this for other people. Or it can take a kind of level of um, creating different forms of empowerment and kind of create like a pipeline to political status. So whether that's like in the case of Los Angeles, there's a neighborhood council, or becoming a representative, or different layers of kind of government that people get involved in order to be part of their communities.
You mentioned in your book, in the conclusions, the Super Bowl. And I
Yeah.
wanted to get into that because it's just another thing where you can perceive it one way and perceive it another. And there are many ways to perceive the concept of a Super Bowl and the stadium that it is in. But before we get into all that stuff, I when you mentioned placemaking, I thought, was Bad Bunny's performance at the Super Bowl during halftime an entertainment artistic version of placemaking? Did you see it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I loved it. I watched it with great anticipation. And yeah, I mean, I didn't think of it as placemaking in the moment when I was watching it, but yeah,
I just thought of it
absolutely.
now. That's why I brought
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah, I think he's doing placemaking work on multiple levels, right? Like most of his work is about placemaking in Puerto Rico. So creating pride in being from the island, refusing to leave, no me quiero ir de aquí, he wants to say like this is the house where my grandfather was born and I want to stay here. These are very clear political statements about placemaking. But in the Super Bowl, he also did a really interesting thing where he named every single country in the Americas.
Mm.
Um, he missed a few, I will say that. He named all the major ones. But he wanted to make a political point about we are all Americans, whether we're North American, South American, Central American, or Caribbean. And so that is very much a form of placemaking, staking a particular kind of claim to place and building community in a particular kind of way.
I loved it, and I want to go back and watch it again. Uh, I fortunately had a subscription to Peacock, which I don't plan on continuing. I got it for a deal last year when the Saturday Night Live movie was coming out, and it's expiring. And sorry, Peacock, I'm not going to continue. But I don't think I've ever watched a Super Bowl. I'm not into football. It's a violent sport, in my opinion. Um, and I haven't even followed many of the half times, but I was so excited about this one, and I'm so glad I was able to see it. And there's so many details that I know I missed, so I have to go back. But I loved that there was so much heart in this presentation in 13 minutes, so much love, so many people represented, so many issues represented. But now let's go to the dark side and let's talk about funding for stadiums, for Super Bowls and other big events.
Yeah, yeah. So in the final chapter of the book, the conclusion, I write about the SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California, where a Super Bowl was played in 2022. I don't remember what number Super Bowl it was. But that stadium at the time, and I think it still is, the most expensive stadium ever built in the world, a $5.5 billion construction costs. Um, and it will become a very important site for the 2028 Olympics. Um, so because of both the fact that it's an NFL stadium, but also the funding that goes into planning for Olympics, there's all kinds of infrastructure that's coming up around this stadium. So new transit lines are being built, housing complexes, a lot of kind of mixed use things where there's a lot of retail on the ground floor and then it's a high-rise apartment. It's absolutely shifting the demographics right around the stadium. One of the women that I have been doing research with, who's a resident of South Central, who lives, well, she's technically a resident of Inglewood. She lives very near the stadium, and she says she gets knocks on her door every single day asking if she wants to sell her house. I've talked to dozens of people in the area who are
Mm.
talking about the constant pressure that they get from developers to sell their house. And rent, the city of Inglewood has created a cap on rent control, but there was a critical period before they were able to get rent control passed where landlords were able to surge rents in the area. So the demographic of the area is changing. The needs of the area are changing. There's new supermarkets that are coming in now as a part of these developments. But the question becomes who's shopping at these markets? Are they actually going to serve the people of South Central that were the intended recipients of food justice? And the answer is likely no.
It
Um,
never is.
Right. It never is. And so now the question becomes, how are these developments hurting the people of South Central? How are they pushing people out? How are they creating other kinds of inequalities in the area? And what are local city governments and the state and the federal government doing to kind of mitigate and combat the negative impacts of the stadium on the community?
They always use the same reasons. We're going to create jobs, we're going to improve infrastructure, it's going to be a win for everyone. And some of that's true, but it never really pans out to the promises made for the people that really needed the help.
No.
Here's another word, liberation. What is liberation?
So liberation is another tricky word, I will say. Liberation became a word that many of the more grassroots oriented organizations that I was working with latched onto. They were interested in liberation from systems of oppression, liberation from the the negative impacts of capitalism, liberation from racism, liberation from all of the kinds of historical and ideological um, systems and structures that have systematically disenfranchised Black and Brown communities. Um, but liberation obviously can be understood in a lot of different ways. And as I was kind of writing the doing the final edits of this book, Donald Trump coined the day that his tariffs took place as being Liberation Day. So that's just another example of how, like, we have to be really careful how we use words, and we can't assume that we all mean the same thing by them. But I did find that in this particular community of more grassroots-oriented folks, they were interested in the kind of liberation that's actually about getting away from the status quo systems and structures that we all live within.
It's bigger than both of us and bigger than your book. Uh, we can only handle so much at one time in our brains,
Yeah,
but there's a lot of work to do.
yeah,
One thing I loved was talking about, I noted the page, all organizing is science fiction. And the idea of dreaming the possibilities, where people say, oh, you can't do that, or that's impossible. We have seen the impossible become the impossible on so many levels. And that's what's inspiring. That's what brings hope. So I'm all about dreaming. And a lot of the issues you bring up in your book seem impossible to solve. But
yeah,
there are
yeah,
people dreaming, right?
yeah. Yes, absolutely. The people who tended to be more aligned with visions of liberation were dreaming of a future that is based on something they've never seen in their lifetimes. It's an idea that we can demand that everyone have equal access to healthy food. We can demand different systems that seem virtually impossible to have. And even if we know deep down that it's virtually impossible, we can still keep working toward building a different kind of world. This is called abolitionist thinking. It's about dreaming about a different kind of way of life. And that holding that possibility of something different was what kept a lot of the more grassroots organizations going, and really motivated them to push beyond short timelines and to push beyond the idea that like they needed to have these outcomes very quickly, and to say like, no, we are on this centuries long journey toward something that we're dreaming of, and we're going to keep working toward that.
I'm familiar with the abolitionist concept when it comes to animal rights. I've been a vegan 38 years, and just in having this conversation, I'm wondering, as a white woman, am I really perceiving the needs of non-human animals that are exploited for food? Am I speaking for them in a way that is helpful to them? I'm not them. I don't know.
Yeah,
And I'll
I
never
don't
know,
know.
right?
Right.
But I don't really think they can speak for themselves. They do in their own way, in many ways, but mm, I know they need help, and want to help them however I can. But I want to talk about, in the few minutes we have left, traditional foods, change, and kale. So let's talk about how traditional foods are important, especially in South Central Los Angeles.
Yeah. So, um, a lot of what food justice activists from the outside did was to kind of imagine what people are eating in South Central. And often this would be very stereotypical food. So they might imagine that Black families are eating fried chicken and collard greens cooked with pork and um, I don't know, like cornbread with lots of butter on it. And so as they're creating cooking workshops or nutrition information workshops, they try to like healthify or change that cuisine into something healthy with the good intentioned idea that they're still trying to stay in line with people's traditional ways of eating. Um, and so there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding about what people are actually eating. People that I've studied in their households like rarely are frying chicken. It's a very laborious and messy process that a lot of people don't want to get involved in. They're much more likely to be eating like a pot of beans or a pot of greens, with rice or with whatever other starch they're using. There's a really limited idea about what families are traditionally eating. And the same kind of goes for the Latino families in the area. There was often an oversimplification of Latinidad and an assumption that people are like eating tacos, burritos, enchiladas, and thinking about how to make those things healthier in some way or another. And so that is a fundamental problem. But the way that people actually, quote unquote, traditionally eat is not generally a problem. Often people's traditional foodways are quite healthy. So one thing that many food justice activists didn't understand is that people are making sauces from scratch out of vegetables that they're roasting and putting into a blender, and that is a very, very healthy way of making food that doesn't necessarily need to be quote unquote healthified by a well-meaning outsider.
If we study history, we should know that the people that were brought into slavery in the United States had excellent farming skills and they knew how to feed themselves healthfully. And we've just exploited that. And fortunately, some people try and bring it back into their families. I know as a vegan, um, we have maybe not all, but we often look to different ethnic foods, traditional foods from different communities, because so many of them are naturally plant-based, and we just remove the animal. And so we can have all different kinds of traditional foods, substituting or taking out different things to make them more healthful or more compassionate. Uh, Kale.
Yeah.
You have a
Kale.
thing about kale, and it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say I do like kale. I regularly eat kale. I buy it almost every week. But kale has gotten a bad rap. It kind of has a particular kind of connotation that's associated with a kind of pedantic whiteness or a like a kind of foodie snobby whiteness. So I saw people in the community really make strong associations between kale and whiteness. Um, and often food justice organizations were encouraging people to eat kale as a healthy substitute for other greens. So they might encourage people that they assume are eating collards to substitute their cooked collards for raw kale. Another reason that kale was so ubiquitous in the food justice community in South Central is that it grows pretty well there and pretty abundantly. So it's easy to grow in community gardens and to overwinter and grow multiple types of it. So it's given away all the time in food giveaways. Um, and so it's become associated with the sort of outsiders of the food justice movement constantly trying to foist kale upon communities of Black and Brown people who don't necessarily resonate so well with kale.
Okay, we just have like very little time left, and I want to wrap this up, but I want to say for kale, kale saved my life because I had cancer 20 years ago and I green juiced for 10 years. And amongst other tools that I use, I know that it was important. And my family never ate kale. So there's a lot of people I know who eat and love kale that never ate it. So we learn about what foods are healthful, and fortunately, they become more abundant and more affordable. Excuse me. Um, so I understand what you're saying, but I also think changing and accommodating, for what we learn is important. And I promote all green foods. We all should be eating more dark leafy greens, raw and cooked. Collards are fabulous. They're a little hard to eat raw because they're so chewy. But there are plenty of softer leafy greens, and we all need to be eating them because it's an ideal food for humans. And on that green note, I want to thank you, Hannah Garth, for your book, Food Justice Undone, Lessons for Building a Better Movement. This was a delightful conversation, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a delicious week.